Welcome to session 3 of the Parenting Children course. We hope you're finding the course helpful and you've been able to put some new ideas into practice.
If you think it's complex being a parent, then you're not alone. I remember some years ago when Tony Blair was Prime Minister reading a quote by him which said, "I find being a parent more difficult than being Prime Minister." I found that very reassuring.
One of the challenges is that children can be very adept at making excuses from a young age. When Barney was 3, he went to a nursery school situated right next to where we lived.
One day, his teacher came to our door, holding Barney's hand and looking rather worried. She told us that Barney'd got something stuck up his nose, but she wasn't sure what.
I was tempted to be furious with him right away, as he and his friend had only the week before pushed some nuts from the garden up their noses. And the school and I had told him how dangerous that was. However, I didn't want to risk him taking a big sniff and the object getting more stuck. So I said nothing and went to get the tweezers.
Scylla then proceeded to pull a large brown button out of Barney's nose.
At which point I asked Barney very firmly why he'd put it up his nose. His reply was that he hadn't. Then how on earth did it get there, I demanded.
To which Barney replied without any hesitation, "It sort of fell up my nose."
Our children's excuses mustn't stop us setting boundaries for their behaviour, which is the topic of this session. Through doing so, we help them to make good choices.
First of all, we want to look at why we need to set boundaries. Some people think if we ensure our children feel loved, all will be well. There's a proverb in the Bible which goes, "Those who love their children are careful to discipline them." So setting boundaries is something we do for our children. Love and discipline go together. They're not contradictory.
In fact, we do them a disservice if we don't set boundaries, as our children will grow up thinking they can do what they like when they like and believe the world revolves around them and their own needs. They'll end up self-centred.
The other day I came across something called a toddler's property laws. If I like it, it's mine. If it's in my hand, it's mine. If I saw it first, it's mine. If it looks like mine, it's mine. If you're playing with something and you put it down, it automatically becomes mine. If it's broken, it's yours. And time again, we have to train them, don't we, not to act in that way. You know, sometimes if we let them act that way as a 5-year-old, they'll act that way as a 35-year-old. So all the time, we're trying to teach them the power of boundaries. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable.
When a child is taught the difference between kind and selfish behaviour, they're learning lessons for life. They learn to take responsibility for their own actions, which in turn enables them to form healthy relationships.
As a teacher, I've taught my students about boundaries and disciplines. For instance, in one football lesson, because they all love football, I've decided to say, OK, and the focus was rules. I took away all the rules and I told them we're going to play for 2 minutes without rules. And, you know, within seconds, one of the kids was hurt, up looking at me, saying, "That was a foul." And I repeat, "No rules." And they started to clue on, and they, picked up the ball, and they started running. And they ran around the field, and everyone's chasing them. And it got manic. And I sat them down, and I said, "Right, we're going to play 2 minutes with rules." And then eventually, when I asked them, questioned them and asked them some questions about it, they then realised, actually, it's there to have fun, not just to restrict you from doing what you want. It enables you to be able to play a game and have fun. So that's what I drew out of that lesson, looking at boundaries and discipline, actually.
The combination of loving our children unconditionally and putting in appropriate boundaries for their behaviour is foundational for our children's development and for their journey to maturity.
Love and boundaries together give our children a healthy respect for authority. Authority is an important and necessary part of life. Modelling a respect for authority starts with us in the home.
The way that we respond to authority, of course, will have a very big impact on how our children respond to authority. So, for example, if we undermine the headmistress at our child's school or the teacher by saying silly things about them and disempowering those figures of authority, of course, that's not going to be teaching our children to respect authority.
Children definitely need to respect figures of authority, whether it be their parents, whether it be teachers in school, whether it be a police officer on the street, whether it be a shopkeeper, somebody who needs to be respected. But it is important because I think one of the dangers today is possibly because parents aren't instilling that in their children. A lot of children don't respect teachers, don't respect a level of authority in our society, and then that doesn't enable a child to function well and healthily within that society.
As well as teaching our children to have a respect for authority, we also need to let them know that they must speak out if that authority is being abused in any way.
Many children today are growing up without an understanding that authority is an important and necessary part of life. And that's making it harder for teachers and other authority figures to impose order.
The one thing I'd love parents to do more, actually, is to set boundaries and routines. To have a set routine means that when they come to school, things are a lot easier. I sometimes find as a teacher, I'm like the parent. I'm teaching the boundaries, the routines, when to go to lesson, how to get there on time. And at home, sometimes they're not there. And schools and teachers, we can find that very difficult.
If young children don't have boundaries, then they're going to find the routines and the structure of school life difficult. They particularly will have difficulty listening and participating fully within lessons, because if they are used to having their own agenda, used to getting their own way, if parents are not willing to say no and are allowing children to push and to follow their own instincts, and that's fine from an experiential point of view to an extent. However, in terms of our social responsibility to work with others, and we don't grow up in isolation, we have to grow up within the wider community, those boundaries are absolutely essential.
Parents shouldn't shy away from imposing discipline. The real meaning of the word discipline is learning. It involves training, guiding, teaching, explaining the right way to live. It also includes correcting and sometimes having a consequence, a sanction for wrong behaviour.
This poem describes how hard it can be as a parent to put boundaries in place. I loved you enough to ask you where you were going, with whom, and what time you would get home. I loved you enough to insist that you saved up your pocket money to buy a bike for yourself that we could have afforded to buy for you. I loved you enough to make you return a Milky Way with a bite out of it and to confess I stole this. I loved you enough to let you see hurt, disappointment and tears in my eyes. I loved you enough to let you stumble, fall and hurt. But most of all, I loved you enough to say no when you hated me for it. Those were the most difficult battles of all. I'm glad I won them, because in the end, you won too.
As parents, we can find it hard to say no and to put in these boundaries. If you're parenting on your own or step-parenting, it can be particularly hard. We all need confidence to know the benefits of boundaries for our family life and for our children, both at home and at school.
There's this wall we can climb on, except we're not allowed to anymore because Miss Jackson says it's dangerous. And when we walk on it, Mum just says no. Once I went onto the scaffolding by myself. And I went onto the ice by myself.
What did my daddy say?
They said you weren't allowed to go on the scaffolding again, even with a person. And the same with the ice. But my dad gave me one more chance because I only went on there once for the scaffolding. With the ice, I wasn't. One time I knocked over my dad's red wine on the carpet and he got really, and it's like a white cream carpet, and he got so mad at me. When we wanted to get these England cards, she says no. It's only on Wednesdays and Saturdays we get them.
When I was playing around in the kitchen and my mum told me off, and then I ignored her, and then me and my sister kept running around, and then she pushed me, and then I wasn't looking where I was going, and I elbowed a vase over onto the floor, and I got very told off for that.
I think your parents make lots of rules.
Yes, because they want to keep us safe. Yeah.
Children need to know where the boundaries are. Actually, they like the consistency. Good boundaries help a child feel safe, and children will typically push to find where the boundaries lie and then keep pushing to see if they're firm. Without firm boundaries, they're likely to feel insecure.
I remember this lady giving an illustration of a child walking across a suspension bridge, and that if they don't have the boundaries in place, it's like walking across and not having anything to hold on to. And I think for me that was such a good illustration, it made me realise how important those boundaries are for their security and their safety.
I think it's right to say that boundaries are critical for kind of bringing up children effectively and safely.
In our house, we make sure the children know what the boundaries are, and then from there, that if they continue to cross those boundaries, we'll give them 3 warnings, and then if they continue, they'll be sitting on the naughty step for the number of minutes of their age, which works quite effectively. I think one very big thing with boundaries is to make sure that you do see it through. So often you hear people promising, you hear them out and about promising to, you won't get this when you get home, or if you do that one more time, and you see the children not only do it just one more time, but they do it again and again and again, and there's no consequence. So boundaries are very important. Seeing it through is even more so.
I don't want to do stuff that I'm not allowed to do, because otherwise I do get very badly punished. I'm not allowed to get eating sweets for a whole week or something like that, and I really don't want that to happen.
It's exhausting for parents to put in and then to maintain consistent boundaries. It can be one of the hardest areas of parenting and is often physically and emotionally draining. I remember all too well the tiredness and frustration of dealing with one of our children who went through a phase of hitting other children, and another who refused to stay in bed at night.
Sometimes parents on our courses tell us their first aim is to be their children's friends. But actually, children need their parents to be parents. No one else can do that. And that will involve the responsibility and hard work of putting in boundaries.
Ultimately, our long-term aim is that our children should be setting their own boundaries. And that process of moving from parent-imposed boundaries to self-imposed boundaries, from parental control to self-control, is a gradual one.
The next question is, where do we set the boundaries? There are 2 extremes that are dangerous. One extreme is of harshness, where children aren't given any sort of freedom to choose their way at all, and parents try to enforce order through fear.
The other extreme is of permissiveness, where they can do whatever they like.
For myself, knowing where we should set the boundaries led to a lot of self-questioning. Sometimes I thought I'd been too lax with them over manners or their behaviour at meals or whatever. I'd probably damaged them for life. So I would veer the other way and be much stricter. And then I'd think, oh no, I've been much too harsh. I'm really going to crush them this way. So I'd swing back again. What I came to realise was that we needed to set the boundaries somewhere between the 2 extremes.
We're not walking a tightrope along which every step is critical to our children's well-being. A better image is a broad track on which there's a freedom for us to work out our own path and then to be confident and consistent with our decisions.
No 2 families will take exactly the same route. Some will be closer to one edge, some closer to the other. It's a balance.
We found this diagram very helpful to illustrate the importance and effectiveness of combining love and boundaries. The horizontal line going across indicates the degree of firmness we show. The vertical line going up and down indicates the degree of warmth we show.
There are 4 broad styles of parenting. The first style, bottom right, is where there's neither warmth nor firmness, and that's neglectful parenting, little love and weak boundaries. It's where children are left to fend for themselves with little attention from their parents. And the result is they tend to become wild and insecure.
Neglectful parenting can happen in any type of home or family scenario, rich or poor. Children brought up in neglectful homes tend to grow up with poor self-esteem, which can lead to self-destructive and antisocial behaviour.
The second quadrant, bottom left, is where there's a lot of firmness, many strict boundaries, but little love shown. And that's authoritarian, meaning dictatorial parenting. This style is when parents lay down the law, but there's no discussion with children, no listening to them.
These children tend to feel their parents are always against them, which builds resentment and anger. And this too can lead to antisocial behaviour once the children are out of their parents' immediate control.
The third quadrant, top right, is where parents are high on warmth, but there are no or weak boundaries. This is called indulgent parenting. With this style, children are spoilt and self-centred. They're allowed to do what they like.
Children brought up like this can find it hard to accept that the world doesn't revolve around them, which leads to a lack of self-discipline. And later on, they're more likely to get into drug or alcohol abuse.
And then the fourth quadrant is described as authoritative parenting. This is very different to being authoritarian. This is where children know they're loved and know that there are clear boundaries which will be firmly enforced.
This combination of warmth and firmness, of love and limits, is the one that we're aiming for. With this style, children feel safe. They learn to take their place in their family and in the world. They know that they're very special, but will not always be the centre of attention. This style guards us from child-centred parenting, which is unhelpful to the child and to the family as a whole.
This style of authoritative parenting, this combination of love and limits, produces the qualities most of us would ultimately want to see in our children. It leads them to maturity and an ability to relate well to others.
When we first think of the concept of warmth and firmness, we might think they're two opposite things, that if you have one, you lose some of the other. In fact, when it comes to our children, it's just not true. If you are firm, it doesn't reduce in any way the amount of warmth we have in our relationship with our children. And in many ways, if we're firmer and provide boundaries and guidelines, our children might even feel warmer and safer. So we must never fear that if we are firm with our children and we have boundaries and we enforce those boundaries, that the warmth will go, and that worse yet, our children might not love us as much. It's just not true.
We want to give you two hypothetical examples to give you an idea of how the different styles work in practice.
The first example is of Richard, aged 10, who wants to rent an aged 15 certificate DVD that his friends have all been talking about.
The neglectful parent lets him watch whatever he likes in his bedroom on his own, or maybe not even know he's watching anything.
The authoritarian parent gets cross and doesn't allow him to rent any more DVDs.
The indulgent parent lets him rent it after a lot of pleading.
The authoritative parent says no, explains why, and then helps him to choose a more appropriate DVD.
The second example is of Annie, aged 4, who's just snatched a ball from Lila, another child the same age in the playground.
The authoritarian parent is likely to say, "Come back here this minute and give the ball back to Lila."
The indulgent parent, believing that Annie should be allowed to give full expression to her desires, looks on with a smile and doesn't comment.
The neglectful parent doesn't even notice what's happening, as he's speaking on a mobile phone at the other end of the playground.
The authoritative parent might say, "The ball belongs to Lila. I know you'd like to play with it, but come and ask her nicely if you could have a turn after her."
One of the classic things about this last example is that it's in a public place. And that's where our children so often test us. It's worth thinking through how we're going to react when our children challenge the boundaries so that we're not caught off guard.
You know, when it comes to boundaries, we have to, I think, accept that our children will test them. I think now of a father who bought a kitten for his family. He brought it home in a little box. But before he took the animal out of the box, he lined up the 4 children. I think Rebecca was the youngest. She's about 4 years old. And he gave the house rules with regard to this little animal. Now he said you can cuddle him, and you can stroke him, and you can feed him in terms. But on no account must you ever pull this little cat's tail. Do you all understand that? They all nod their heads, particularly little Rebecca. And rather naively, I thought, he took this animal out of the basket and put it on the floor, whereupon the youngest, with 4 strides of those chubby little legs, went forward and pulled this cat's tail. I practically saw the poor animal's eyes momentarily leave its head. What was going on there? She was saying, "You know what, Daddy, you gave me the boundaries. They were very, very clear. You did a great job of it, but I'm going to test you now, because I want to see how important those boundaries are to you." This is a sacred moment. At that time, this little girl is looking for a reaction from her father. It is vital she is not disappointed.
The younger our children are when we start setting boundaries, the easier it is for them to learn. However, it's never too late. So our encouragement is start from where you are now. When we put boundaries in place, we're teaching our children certain behaviour is right and certain behaviour is wrong.
Children don't arrive in the world knowing that. They need to learn it, and we need to teach them.
So, how do we go about setting boundaries? We want to start with a tool that was invaluable for us when our children were young. It's the concept of right and wrong choices.
Right and wrong choices requires us, first of all, to teach our children what is acceptable behaviour and what is unacceptable. We need to explain, for example, that it's not acceptable to throw food around, to pull hair, to hit another child, and so on. And by 2 years old, they're quite able to understand these things.
Then they must know that there are different consequences for keeping within or crossing a boundary that we've set. They quickly discover that the consequences for one are pleasant and for the other are unpleasant.
They also learn that they're responsible for their own actions. The choice is theirs.
So, for example, we tell our child not to throw a hard toy across the room. If he continues, we say to him, "It's your choice. If you don't stop throwing the toy, you'll go and sit on the step." If he chooses to stop, we encourage him by saying something like, "Well done, you made the right choice." If he doesn't, he experiences the disagreeable consequence of his own wrong choice, perhaps by sitting on the step on his own for a designated time.
I think it's really helpful to understand right and wrong choices with children, particularly when they're really young and they're learning boundaries and they're learning what's right and wrong.
Definitely the whole concept of right and wrong choices, I guess it makes our children as well feel like they have a say, and suddenly there's not that the conflict between me and them, because they actually know that they have the power to make a good choice or a bad choice, so the ball's really in their court. And I'll often say, listen, these are your choices, I hope you make the best one, and they'll make the right choice more often than not. But it's great to just say, well, you know what, this is not about me and you, this is about you. You can choose the outcome here.
It's important that there's a consequence for a wrong choice, but it's equally important that we reinforce right choices. The best way to do that is through noticing what they've done and praising them for it.
I think it's important for us to reinforce good choices. We do that mainly by words of affirmation, letting them know that they've made the right choice and that we're pleased with them. I think that can be the biggest boost for your child, to know that and hear the words that, that well done, you've made the right choice, that was excellent.
It helps them if we describe the behaviour we're wanting to reinforce. So we might say, "Well done getting out of the bath when I asked you. It means we can now have longer for stories," or "Thanks so much for calling to let me know you've arrived at your friend's house safely."
If we notice and praise these good choices, they're much more likely to do them again.
Sometimes, however, with an ongoing issue, an extra incentive can help. I remember a time when Barney, aged 4, after coming home from nursery school every day, would take every piece of clothing he possessed out of his cupboard and try them all on, and then fling them off again all over the place. And every night, his room looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. So eventually, we made a star chart, and he got a star if the clothes were put away again before bath time. And then he got a reward when he'd filled up a row of stars. I don't think he got a star every night, but it helped a lot. And after a few weeks, it wasn't an issue anymore.
At the same time as Barney getting a star for putting his clothes away, we enabled the other children to earn stars for making good choices over other issues, so it was fair.
When they were a little bit younger, it was great. We had a jar on the side and we painted pasta shells, different colours, and we would fill the jar. So if they did something good, spontaneously good, they got lots of pasta. And there's kind of a little picture at the top of the jar, or we would write on the jar with what they would receive when they got to the top of the jar. Great for babysitters, or when one of our older children has them, it's great, because we say if you fill the jar or half fill the jar, whatever we feel is reasonable, you can't make it unobtainable, can you? When we come home from the evening or tomorrow, this will be your reward. And it's great because they have the incentive.
Yeah. And at different stages of them growing up, we've had star charts, or we've had, that sort of thing. So we've used a variety of incentives as time has gone on.
A second principle that helped us in setting boundaries was to choose the right battles.
We have to decide what issues really matter and what we should let go, so that we aren't always nagging them, we aren't always on their backs. Sometimes there's a reason why a child is misbehaving or having a tantrum, for example.
We found the acronym HALT very helpful to recognise 4 of the most common triggers for bad behaviour.
H stands for hungry. When our children arrived back from school, their behaviour was often at its worst, arguing, fighting each other and so on. It took us some time to realise often they were hungry, and giving their meal earlier or giving them a snack if their meal wasn't ready changed their behaviour for the better.
A stands for anxious or angry. Anxiety and anger can come out in bad behaviour. We need to find out what's upsetting them, as they might be struggling to understand what they're feeling. Sometimes it'll come out at bedtime, and talking it through or reassuring them can make all the difference to how they feel and subsequently behave.
L stands for lonely. It's worth asking, is our child in need of time or attention, a hug or some encouragement? I remember one mother telling us how her son, aged 6, had come back from school in a terrible mood. She realised something was very wrong, so she just sat on the stairs beside him and put her arm round him for 5 minutes. She said that after that he was fine, and he told her later that no one had played with him in the playground, so he was lonely. He just needed his emotional tank filling up again.
And T stands for tired. School or nursery are really tiring for children, and they will often be out of sorts when they get home. Similarly, after a sleepover, they're quite likely to be bad-tempered. And for some children, just being around a lot of people can be draining for them, and the impact of that spills over in their behaviour. It may be that all they need is some downtime, or a rest, or an earlier bedtime.
Now, of course, the same questions apply to us. It's worth asking ourselves, are we hungry, anxious, lonely or tired? That can help us recognise whether we're being reasonable in the way we're reacting to our children's behaviour.
When our own children were young, I often realised I would react badly if I was tired or worried. I'd find myself being impatient and snappy with them, when actually they'd done nothing to deserve that sort of treatment.
Understanding the acronym HALT, hungry, anxious, lonely, tired, has been a huge help to us. With our 6-year-old, for example, I find that he sometimes plays up, and it's because he's anxious. And I wouldn't, it's often, I noticed before the beginning of going back to school, for example, for 2 days before that, he was really playing up. And it took us a little while to work out that that's probably why it was. It was anxious about going back to school.
Tired as well is a big thing as well. If they don't get through, if we don't get through the bedtime routine quick enough within good time, then sometimes it can go also a little bit pear-shaped at the end of the day.
And it's also helped us to just be more lenient at certain times instead of being all regimental and now let's find a consequence for this behaviour. Yeah. We just be a little bit more gentle and say, oh dear, like now we've all had a meltdown, let's just have a snack now and a cup of tea and then we'll start again. And so I guess just knowing about HALT has helped us parent a little bit more gently.
A third principle for setting boundaries is to recognise the difference between natural childishness and disobedience.
An example of our child disobeying what we've said and exerting their own will would be walking through a puddle in their shoes when you've just told them not to. Other examples might be not staying in bed when they know clearly it's bedtime and we've said goodnight, watching a TV programme they know they're not allowed to watch, refusing to leave a friend's house when it's time to go home.
By contrast, natural childishness is children being children. They'll do childish things, accidents will happen. Children are not mature adults, and we shouldn't expect them to behave like adults.
So, some examples of natural childishness for different age children might be milk getting knocked over at breakfast because their arm's not long enough to reach, toys left out in the rain, clothes getting dirty or even torn when playing outside, wet towels left on their bed.
It will help us enormously if we can distinguish between disobedience and natural childishness, and the need to deal decisively with the one and cutting them some slack for the other.
Obviously, as they get older, we have to make adjustments. What is childishness when they're 3 can be carelessness when they're 7. At 7, they know that wet towels shouldn't be left on a bed, whereas at 3, it would be childishness.
I think it's really helpful recognising childish behaviour, natural childish behaviour and deliberate disobedience. It's really helped me in my parenting, actually, because you can get really cross about things like, you know, a child, sort of young child opening the car door and smacking it into a tree, or to every mealtime a drink gets spilled over the floor and things like that. And actually, they're young, it's just a natural part of life when you're that age, you know, sort of, and it's accidents happen. And it does help if that's not one of your triggers for getting angry or getting cross, but you can just put it down to childish behaviour. And then you also recognise when something's more deliberate, and that can help you parent more effectively, I think, definitely.
So, the third principle for setting boundaries is to recognise natural childishness. The fourth principle is maintaining a sense of humour. Humour makes such a difference to the atmosphere of our home. So try not to get too uptight about the battles. Find time to laugh about them with your partner or with other parents when your children aren't within earshot.
Disciplining with humour goes a long way towards making the setting of boundaries more pleasant, both for us and for our children.
Please turn now to the questions in your manual.